Rescuers recovered two bodies from the murky river water. A university professor and his graduate student lay entwined in deathly silence. At first glance, it looked like a tragic drowning. But the marks on their bodies and the strange circumstances of their discovery suggested a carefully concealed murder. The discovery was reported to police early in the morning. A fisherman, venturing down to a river in the suburbs of a small American town, noticed a dark spot in the water, caught between some snags. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was a human body. A second body was soon discovered nearby. The shocked witness immediately called emergency services, and within 20 minutes, police, forensic experts, and divers arrived at the scene. The first body to be recovered was a middle-aged man, dressed in a casual suit. Documents found in his breast pocket quickly identified him. He was a university professor, well known in local academic circles. The second body belonged to a young woman, significantly younger than the man. A student ID card from the same university was found in her bag. A photograph and name confirmed that she was the professor's graduate student. A visual examination yielded no definitive answer as to the cause of death. Surface marks could indicate injuries, but these could have been sustained after death while the bodies were in the water. Police recorded every detail: the location where the bodies were trapped, clothing, and objects found nearby. Crucially, there were no signs of vehicles or struggle on the shore. The bodies were sent to the morgue for forensic examination. The crime scene was cordoned off. Journalists, quickly informed of the discovery, began gathering by the river. The police avoided comment, limiting themselves to a blunt confirmation. Two people had been found, their identities had been established, and the circumstances were being investigated. The news sent shockwaves through the university. The professor's colleagues couldn't believe he could have died so senselessly. He was considered a disciplined man, rarely leaving campus late at night, and students noted his strictness and demanding nature. Less was known about the graduate student. She was only in her second year and had already participated in several research projects. The first theories centered on the hypothesis of an accident. Perhaps the professor and graduate student had come to the river to relax or discuss their work and ran into trouble. However, doubts also arose. Neither of them had a habit of spending time by the water, and witnesses couldn't recall seeing them there before. Police have begun an investigation into the victim's final movements. According to the professor's neighbors, he left home the previous evening in his car, accompanied by a young woman who appeared to be a student. No one knew exactly where they were headed. The girl's parents confirmed that their daughter left the apartment that evening, saying she was meeting her supervisor to discuss her dissertation. Forensic experts carefully examined the victim's clothing and belongings. Car keys and several university-related papers were found in the professor's pockets. The graduate student retained a phone, which was soon sent for analysis. However, what was odd was that their clothing was almost completely free of dirt, even though their bodies had been in the river for several hours. This could indicate that they had not entered the water from the shore, but had been transported and dumped later. At the same time, interrogations of colleagues began. Most claimed that the professor and the graduate student had a purely professional relationship, but some cautiously hinted that they might have had closer ties. However, no evidence was found to support this theory. The police did not rule out any version, but already on the first day, it became clear that it was highly questionable whether it was a coincidence. The investigation required a thorough examination of the victims' identities. Police officers understood that without a clear understanding of who the professor and his graduate student were, it would be impossible to construct a coherent picture of the events. The professor was 52 years old. He taught sociology and was considered strict, reserved, and methodical. His research had been recognized by several publications in respected journals. He led a research group and was respected within the academic community. Colleagues described him as a workaholic, completely immersed in his work. His personal life, however, seemed far less stable. He had divorced several years earlier, had no children, and lived alone in a house on the outskirts of town. Neighbors noted his isolation. He rarely participated in the social life of the neighborhood, limiting himself to polite greetings and quick trips to the store. His graduate student was 25 years old. Born and raised in a neighboring state, she enrolled in graduate school and then decided to pursue a career in academia. She chose this professor specifically for her dissertation work, as she was interested in topics related to social dynamics and inequality. Classmates described her as energetic, goal-oriented, and willing to work hard to achieve success. Her parents said their daughter rarely shared personal problems, but she regularly visited her family and maintained a close relationship with her younger sister. The police investigated their relationship in detail. Officially, it was a relationship between a supervisor and a graduate student, but there were differing opinions. Some students claimed that the professor paid more attention to this girl than to others, inviting her to additional meetings and involving her in joint projects. However, there was no direct evidence of an intimate relationship. At the same time, such rumors complicated the investigators' work. They needed to determine whether this was the cause of potential conflicts. The investigation revealed that in recent months, the professor had often stayed late at work, sometimes with his graduate student. University cameras recorded them leaving together late at night. The faculty secretary confirmed that she saw them together on the day of their disappearance. Around 6 p.m., they left the university building, got into the professor's car, and drove away. The girl's friends reported that she spoke of intense work on her dissertation and constant arguments with her advisor. They said the professor was demanding, sometimes overly harsh. She complained of criticism and fatigue, but at the same time, she said these efforts were necessary for her future career. The professor's financial life attracted particular attention. Investigators discovered regular large transfers in his bank accounts, the origin of which required clarification. The funds came from individuals and organizations involved in consulting and research projects. At the same time, some of the transfers appeared unusual. They came from shell companies. This could indicate involvement in dubious financial schemes. As for the girl, her financial situation was much more modest. Her parents helped pay the rent, and she worked part-time as an assistant at the university. She didn't have large sums in her accounts, but an examination of her phone revealed that several weeks before her death, she had searched online for information about possible grants and scholarships. Investigators began analyzing the social connections of both men. The professor's circle included several colleagues with whom he competed for research funding. One of them cautiously noted in a conversation with police that the deceased often took a hardline stance and could have made enemies within the academic community. The girl had a wider social circle. In addition to her family and university, she had friends outside the academy. Several witnesses confirmed that she had a close acquaintance with whom she maintained regular contact. Investigators have begun investigating this person, but have not yet released any details. By this point, the police were of two minds. On the one hand, the professor and graduate student could have been victims of an accident or even suicide. On the other hand, mounting evidence pointed to someone having a motive to eliminate them both. Theories of accident gradually faded into the background. The forensic examination, the results of which were received by investigators several days later, significantly altered the initial theories. The bodies of the professor and graduate student were found to bear injuries that could not be explained by simple drowning. The man had blows to the head and deep scratches on his arms. The girl had bruises on her shoulders and abrasions on her wrists, consistent with restraint. The experts concluded that both had suffered injuries before entering the water. A lung analysis revealed that the professor drowned in the river, but his graduate student died earlier. There was no water in her airway. This meant she died before her body reached the river. For the investigators, this was crucial. This was not an accident, but a premeditated murder. Forensic experts carefully examined the clothing and personal belongings. Fibers were found on the girl's sleeves that didn't match her clothing or the fabric of the professor's car. Experts speculated that these were remnants of carpet or upholstery. Particles of clay, not typical for the shore where the bodies were found, remained on the professor's shoes. These details indicated that the victims were likely held elsewhere and then taken to the river. Investigators began checking the associates of the deceased for people with access to their personal lives. They paid particular attention to the professor's conflict with a department colleague who was competing with him for a grant for a major research project. Witnesses claimed they had heated arguments, and the colleague himself had spoken extremely harshly. His interrogation yielded no direct evidence, but investigators continued to keep him under surveillance. The girl's phone became another important source of information. Several messages sent the day before her death were recorded in the correspondence. She arranged to meet with an unknown person, mentioned that she needed to discuss an important matter, and that the professor would be with her. However, the recipient's identity was not immediately established. The contact was saved under a false name. The professor's car also aroused interest. It was found in a parking lot near the university, but an examination revealed that it had recently been thoroughly washed. Traces of moisture and small particles of sand were found in the trunk, matching those found on the victim's clothing. This reinforced suspicions that the vehicle had been used to transport bodies. Gradually, the accident theory disappeared from the case file. Investigators began to unravel a complex scenario. A professor and a graduate student leave the university in the evening, meet someone, and then both end up in the hands of an unknown person or persons. The girl dies first, and the professor later in the water. At a press conference, a police spokesman confirmed that the circumstances pointed to murder. However, to narrow the circle of suspects, additional evidence was needed. The investigation was entering a new phase where every detail, from the strange transfers to the professor's account to the graduate student's hidden connections, would have to be thoroughly examined. By the middle of the investigation, investigators had zeroed in on a range of possible suspects. The primary goal was to determine who might have benefited from the assassination of the professor and his graduate student. The first to come into view was a department colleague with whom the professor was competing for a major research grant. They had indeed had a long-standing conflict. Each was striving to secure funding for their own projects. Several faculty members openly stated to police that the rivalry had escalated into personal animosity. However, the investigation had no evidence linking this individual to the crime scene. His alibi, an evening lecture, and a subsequent meeting with students was corroborated by several witnesses. The next step was to check the graduate student's personal contacts. Telephone records revealed that the day before her death, she had been corresponding with a person whose identity was concealed under a code name. It was later revealed that this person was a young university employee holding an administrative position. He admitted to maintaining a close relationship with the girl, but denied meeting her on the day of her disappearance. His alibi, a trip to another city, was confirmed by highway surveillance footage, but investigators continued to investigate him. Too many coincidences pointed to his possible involvement. The professor's financial transactions attracted particular attention. Interviews with employees of several organizations revealed that he had indeed consulted for various companies, but some of the transfers remained questionable. An economic analysis revealed a pattern. Funds were received from shell companies and then transferred to foreign accounts. The investigation suggested that the professor may have been involved in money laundering through academic contracts. This opened another possibility: a financially motivated murder. At the same time, police were checking on people outside the university. The girl's parents claimed she had recently been under pressure. According to her mother, her daughter had said someone had threatened her, but refused to elaborate. Her friends confirmed this information, but they found no concrete evidence in their messages or phone calls. The professor's car occupied a special place in the case file. An examination confirmed that the trunk had indeed been used to transport bodies. A thorough car wash only reinforced suspicions that someone had attempted to cover their tracks. However, no fingerprints were found, except those of the owner. Investigators hypothesized that the car could have been used after the theft and then returned to its original location. Interviews with colleagues and students yielded conflicting accounts. Some insisted the professor and graduate student had a strictly professional relationship, while others hinted at a possible personal connection. This complicated understanding of their final meeting and who might have taken advantage of the situation. Despite a wide range of suspects, there was no direct evidence yet. The evidence only pointed to the meticulous preparation of the crime, the location chosen, the bodies transported, the traces concealed. Investigators realized that the people behind it were well acquainted with the victim's routines and skilled in avoiding attention. By this point, the case was becoming increasingly complex. Some theories were being ruled out, while others, on the contrary, gained strength. But the police had increasing reason to believe that the murder was connected not only to personal relationships or casual conflicts, but to more serious circumstances extending beyond the university. The final stage of the investigation proved crucial. After weeks of analysis and dozens of interrogations, investigators obtained key evidence, recovered data from the graduate student's phone. Specialists were able to reconstruct deleted messages that shed light on her final encounters. The correspondence contained hints that she intended to discuss a serious financial issue with the professor. One message mentioned the word contract and implied that certain people were pressuring her and her supervisor. This information matched the results of the financial investigation. The professor was indeed involved in dubious schemes. Money was channeled through him and later ended up in accounts outside the country. He may have viewed this as a simple consultation, but he was actually participating in money laundering. The correspondence included a date, the evening of their disappearance. This confirmed that they had planned to meet with the person connected to these transfers that very day. The investigation established that the professor and his graduate student left the university to meet with representatives of an outside organization. They may have intended to withdraw their participation in the scheme or demand an explanation. This theory explained why they soon became victims. At the same time, police identified a car captured on surveillance cameras near the river on the night of the murder. The car belonged to a man associated with one of the companies that had been receiving the transfers. His identity was established, but direct evidence linking him to the crime was insufficient. However, an analysis of phone data showed that he was within the coverage area of cell phone towers near the site where the bodies were later found. The reconstruction of events went like this. A professor and a graduate student were on their way to a meeting where the situation spiraled out of control. The girl was forcibly restrained and died first. The professor was likely forced to follow instructions, and then both were taken to the river. The man was drowned to conceal the circumstances, and the girl's body was thrown into the water, faking a shared disaster. The investigation resulted in charges against 2 individuals associated with financial companies. At trial, evidence centered on evidence from the car, phone records, and the graduate student's correspondence. No one directly confessed, but circumstantial evidence and witness testimony proved sufficient to secure conviction. The case sparked widespread public outcry. The tragedy was widely discussed at the university. Some believe the professor was a random victim of circumstances, while others pointed to his personal responsibility for his involvement in dubious schemes. The graduate student's family insisted that her death was the result of her becoming caught up in the games and interests of others. For police, the investigation became an example of how carefully criminals can disguise their actions. What initially appeared to be an accident turned into a complex scheme with financial implications and a carefully orchestrated murder. The case of a professor and his graduate student revealed how scientific ambitions and shady financial activities intertwine with the criminal underworld. The accident turned out to be a carefully concealed murder, and the investigation became a reminder of the fragility of human life in the face of self-interest.